man. To getting drafted in the 5th round, to the owner coming out and saying what he said last week, to now. Man, come on with that bullshit.
What's going on? How everybody doing? I'm well. I'm back at practice today, so I'm thankful. Reps. I think that's pretty much it. Is reps.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did you need an MRI?
The MRI for what?
Just check everything.
I hope I ain't break anything.
It didn't help.
Shedeur, have you been
Buddy, come on now.
The quarterback competition, took its latest turn, with Kevin Stefanski sharing before practice today that Dillon Gabriel was now dealing with some hamstring soreness. Nothing serious, not to the level certainly of Kenny Pickett, who's had to sit out the last missed a couple practices last week.
Then you'll wait for a second, then you'll get cold, then get back hot, then get cold, and my arm and body wasn't used to that, so it's just an adjustment like within the body, within my arm.
So you think you're back to 100% today?
Yeah.
A black quarterback with a 74% college completion rate gets drafted in the 5th round and buried at QB4. Meanwhile, a white quarterback who can't complete 50% of his passes in practice gets handed starting reps. If you think the NFL is a meritocracy, you're about to have your eyes opened. Because what's happening to Shedeur Sanders in Cleveland isn't just bad coaching, it's systematic racial bias disguised as football decisions. And the evidence is so overwhelming, even the Browns can't hide it anymore. What I'm about to show you will make you question everything you thought you knew about how the NFL evaluates talent. For decades, we've been sold the lie that football is the ultimate meritocracy, that talent rises to the top regardless of race, background, or politics. But Shedeur Sanders' treatment in Cleveland exposes the ugly truth. The NFL still operates on a racial hierarchy that prioritizes mediocre white quarterbacks over exceptional black talent. Today, we're going to break down the statistical evidence, examine the decision-making patterns, and reveal how the Browns' quarterback depth chart isn't about football ability. It's about maintaining racial power structures that have controlled this league for generations. By the end of this video, you'll understand why Shedeur's rise isn't just a football story. It's a civil rights moment happening in real time. Let's start with the cold, hard facts that the Browns hoped you'd never see side by side. Shedeur Sanders completed 74% of his passes in college, a rate that puts him among elite quarterback prospects. In his limited NFL practice opportunities, he's maintained nearly 80% efficiency, completing 7 out of 9 reps with what coaches described as absolute confidence and command. These aren't just good numbers, they're exceptional. Now let's look at Dillon Gabriel, the white quarterback who somehow earned starting reps ahead of Shedeur. Gabriel completed just 11 out of 22 reps when given his big opportunity, a 50% completion rate that would get most quarterbacks benched in high school. But it gets worse. On day 8 of camp, Gabriel's arguably worst outing, he completed just 3 out of 14 passes, throwing 11 passes wide off the mark. That's a 21% completion rate, yet he remained ahead of Shedeur on the depth chart. Think about that for a moment. A black quarterback with 80% efficiency sits behind a white quarterback with 21% efficiency. If this was truly about merit, Gabriel would be selling insurance by now. But instead, he was getting first-team reps while Shedeur was relegated to scout team duty, mimicking the opposing QB with backup linemen and no protection. The statistical disparity becomes even more damning when you examine their college careers. Shedeur led Colorado through one of the most dramatic turnarounds in college football history, elevating a 1-11 program while facing constant pressure and scrutiny. Gabriel, meanwhile, was a college hero who bought out and transferred multiple times, never facing the same level of adversity or expectation. But here's where it gets really ugly. When Shedeur returned from his brief absence due to arm soreness, which he clarified was just adjustment to Cleveland's temperature changes, he immediately outperformed everyone. His throws weren't just completions, They were straight-up highlight material with tight windows, perfect timing, leading his receivers like a true field general. Yet somehow, this dominant performance still wasn't enough to move him up the depth chart. The Browns' response? Signed Tyler Huntley immediately. Not because they needed depth, but because they needed insurance against the possibility that Shedeur might ball out in front of the world and make them look stupid for keeping him buried for so long. Think about that logic. They were more afraid of their 5th-round pick succeeding than they were of their supposed starters failing. This isn't about football evaluation. It's about racial evaluation. The same league that questions every black quarterback's football IQ while praising white quarterbacks for their intangibles is playing out in real time in Cleveland. Shedeur Sanders has superior statistics, better performance, and more poise under pressure, yet he was systematically kept away from meaningful opportunities until injuries literally forced the Browns' hand. The 2024 NFL Draft exposed the league's racial bias in its most naked form, and Shedeur Sanders was Exhibit A. Here was a quarterback who had just completed one of the most impressive seasons in college football, leading Colorado to national relevance while posting elite efficiency numbers under constant pressure. Yet somehow, he lasted until the 5th round, pick 164 overall. Let's put this in perspective. Caleb Williams, the white quarterback from USC, went 1st overall despite having a lower completion percentage and playing in a more quarterback-friendly system. Drake May, another white quarterback, went 3rd overall with significantly less impressive statistics than Shedeur. Even Bo Nix, who had multiple mediocre seasons before his senior year breakout, was selected ahead of Shedeur in the 1st round. The justification? The same tired racial tropes that have plagued black quarterbacks for decades. Shedeur was labeled as just Deion's son, his success attributed to his father's coaching rather than his own talent. His poise was called cockiness, his confidence labeled as attitude problems. Meanwhile, white quarterbacks with far less impressive resumes were praised for their leadership qualities and football IQ. But here's where the Browns' own actions expose their racial bias. Owner Jimmy Haslam's public statement that he didn't push for the Shedeur Sanders pick wasn't just careless, it was calculated racial distancing. As one analyst noted, this was a message, a power move designed to distance himself from a decision that was getting too loud, too cultural, too black, too Deion. Think about the language there, too cultural, too black. This is 2024, and an NFL owner is still uncomfortable being associated with black excellence because it threatens the established racial hierarchy. Haslam's comment wasn't about football, it was about maintaining racial control over the narrative. The Browns then compounded this bias by constructing a depth chart that defied all logic. Joe Flacco, a 40-year-old quarterback slower than dial-up internet, was placed at the top. Kenny Pickett, who fizzled out in Pittsburgh with shaky decision-making, was 2nd. Dillon Gabriel, an undersized college hero already getting exposed in camp, was 3rd. And Shedeur, with his superior college statistics and camp performance, was buried at 4th. This wasn't evaluation, it was racial stacking. The same practice that historically kept black players out of thinking positions like quarterback and center was happening in broad daylight. The Browns created a hierarchy based not on talent, but on racial comfort levels. The most damning evidence? When injuries finally forced Shedeur into action, he immediately proved he belonged. His performance wasn't just good, it was so obviously superior that even the coaching staff took notice, and doubters had to sit up and pay attention. If merit truly mattered, why wasn't this talent recognized from day one? The answer is uncomfortable but undeniable. The NFL's evaluation system is still infected with racial bias that sees black quarterbacks as athletes first and football players second, while white quarterbacks are automatically credited with intelligence and leadership regardless of their actual performance. The most insidious aspect of racial bias in the NFL isn't what's said explicitly, it's the coded language that perpetuates stereotypes while maintaining plausible deniability. The coverage of Shedeur Sanders versus his white counterpart reveals a textbook case of racial coding in sports media and coaching evaluation. When Shedeur dominated in practice, completing passes with absolute confidence and command and making throws that were straight-up highlight material, the language used to describe him was notably different from his white counterparts. His confidence was subtly questioned, his poise described in ways that suggested it might be artificial or temporary. Meanwhile, Dillon Gabriel's 50% completion rate was described with excuses and context, rust, nerves, adjustment period. The racial coding becomes even more apparent in how their college careers were framed. Shedeur's success at Colorado was consistently attributed to external factors: his father's coaching, the media attention, the circus atmosphere. His individual achievements, that 74% completion rate, his leadership during Colorado's turnaround, were minimized or explained away. Gabriel, conversely, was praised for his college hero status and experience, with his multiple transfers framed as gaining experience rather than instability. But the most revealing example of racial coding came in the aftermath of Shedeur's dominant return to practice. When he completed 7 out of 9 passes with precision and poise, the narrative didn't shift to maybe we should give this guy more opportunities. Instead, it became about managing expectations and not getting ahead of ourselves. Compare this to how white quarterbacks are typically celebrated for similar performances: immediate calls for increased opportunities and starting consideration. The coaching staff's language revealed their own biases. When Shedeur explained his brief absence was due to arm adjustment to Cleveland's temperature changes, a completely reasonable explanation for someone transitioning from Colorado to Ohio, it was treated with skepticism. Yet when Kenny Pickett missed multiple practices with hamstring issues, it was accepted without question as a legitimate injury concern. The Tyler Huntley signing exposed the most damaging racial coding of all. The Browns brought in Huntley not because they needed depth but as insurance against Shedeur's potential success. The coded message was clear: they were more comfortable with a mediocre black quarterback who knows his place than with an exceptional black quarterback who might demand recognition. This racial coding extends to how success is measured. When white quarterbacks show flashes of talent, they're immediately labeled as having potential and showing promise. When black quarterbacks dominate, they're described as having a good day or showing improvement. The language creates different standards for evaluation based on race. The most damning example came when Shedeur was finally named the starter against Carolina. Instead of celebrating the Browns' discovery of talent, the narrative became about desperation and lack of options. This was never the plan, the coverage emphasized, as if starting your most talented quarterback was somehow a failure of the system rather than its success. This coded language isn't accidental, it's systematic. It maintains racial hierarchies by ensuring that black excellence is always qualified, questioned, or minimized, while white mediocrity is elevated and excused. The Cleveland Browns' handling of their quarterback situation reveals how NFL organizations systematically protect white mediocrity while sabotaging black excellence. This isn't just about individual bias, it's about institutional structures designed to maintain racial hierarchies even when they contradict football logic. Consider the protection afforded to Dillon Gabriel despite his catastrophic performances. After completing just 3 out of 14 passes in his worst outing, throwing 11 passes wide off the mark, Gabriel wasn't demoted or benched. Instead, the organization doubled down, continuing to give him first-team reps while Shedeur remained on scout team duty. When Gabriel's hamstring issues sidelined him, it was treated as an unfortunate injury rather than a convenient excuse to avoid further embarrassment. This institutional protection extends beyond just playing time. Gabriel was given every advantage: first-team reps, chemistry with top receivers, protection from the starting offensive line, and favorable practice conditions. Meanwhile, Shedeur was deliberately handicapped: scout team duty, backup linemen, no protection, and limited opportunities to build timing with receivers. Yet even under these disadvantaged conditions, Shedeur's performance was superior. The Kenny Pickett situation reveals another layer of institutional protection. Despite fizzling out in Pittsburgh and missing practices since July 26 with recurring hamstring issues, Pickett maintained his position ahead of Shedeur on the depth chart. The organization's investment in Pickett, both financial and reputational, created a sunk cost fallacy that prioritized protecting their mistake over recognizing superior talent. But the most revealing example of institutional protection came with Joe Flacco's placement atop the depth chart. At 40 years old and slower than dial-up internet, Flacco represented everything wrong with the NFL's racial hierarchy. His presence at QB1 wasn't about current ability, it was about institutional comfort with familiar mediocrity over unfamiliar excellence. The Tyler Huntley signing exposed the institutional protection racket in its most naked form. When injuries finally cleared a path for Shedeur to showcase his talent, the Browns immediately brought in Huntley as insurance. Not insurance against injury, but insurance against the possibility that Shedeur might prove their evaluation system was fundamentally flawed. This institutional protection operates through several mechanisms. First, the creation of artificial barriers, complex playbooks, veteran leadership requirements, and earning your stripes philosophies that disproportionately impact black quarterbacks. Second, the manipulation of opportunities, limiting meaningful reps, providing inferior supporting casts, and creating no-win situations. Third, the control of narratives, emphasizing intangibles for white players while demanding statistical proof from black players. The Browns' institutional protection racket became so obvious that even their own actions contradicted their stated evaluations. When Shedeur finally got his opportunity and dominated, completing passes with perfect precision and timing and showing poise under pressure, the coaching staff's reaction revealed their bias. Instead of immediately elevating him, they scrambled to maintain the existing hierarchy. The most damning evidence of institutional protection? The Browns were more afraid of Shedeur succeeding than they were of their chosen quarterbacks failing. This fear-based decision-making reveals an organization more committed to protecting racial hierarchies than winning football games. The moment Shedeur Sanders stepped back onto the practice field and completed 7 out of 9 passes with surgical precision, the Browns' carefully constructed racial hierarchy began to crumble. This wasn't just a good practice, it was a systematic demolition of every excuse, every justification, and every racial bias that had kept him buried at QB4. The contrast was impossible to ignore. While Dillon Gabriel struggled with a 50% completion rate and Kenny Pickett remained sidelined with recurring injuries, Shedeur delivered what observers call highlight material throws with perfect timing and absolute confidence. His performance wasn't just superior, it was so obviously superior that even the most biased observers couldn't deny it. But here's what makes this moment historically significant. It forced the Browns to confront their own racial bias in real time. When injuries sidelined their preferred white quarterbacks, they couldn't maintain the fiction that talent evaluation was colorblind. Shedeur's dominance made their previous decisions look not just wrong, but racially motivated. The panic in the Browns front office was palpable. Within hours of Shedeur's dominant performance, they signed Tyler Huntley, not because they needed depth, but because they needed to dilute Shedeur's opportunity. The timing wasn't coincidental. It was calculated damage control designed to prevent Shedeur from getting a full showcase that would expose their evaluation system as fraudulent. The announcement that Shedeur would start against Carolina represents more than just a depth chart change. It's a forced reckoning with racial bias. The Browns didn't choose to start Shedeur. They were compelled to start him when their racial hierarchy collapsed under the weight of reality. As the coverage noted, this was never the plan, and this isn't strategy, it's desperation. This desperation reveals the true cost of racial bias in the NFL. The Browns spent months protecting inferior white quarterbacks while sabotaging superior black talent, and now they're facing the consequences. Their plan was exposed as racial preference disguised as football evaluation. The broader implications extend far beyond Cleveland. Shedeur's rise forces uncomfortable questions about every NFL roster, every depth chart, and every evaluation decision. If the Browns could be this wrong about such obvious talent, how many other black quarterbacks have been systematically suppressed? How many white quarterbacks have been elevated beyond their abilities? The Friday night game against Carolina isn't just Shedeur's audition, it's the NFL's judgment day. When Shedeur takes the field, he's not just representing himself, he's representing every black quarterback who's been told they're not ready, not smart enough, or not a natural leader. His success won't just vindicate his own talent, it will expose the racial bias that has infected NFL evaluation for generations. The Browns created this moment by trying to suppress black excellence, but they can't control what happens next. Once Shedeur proves his superiority on national television, the racial hierarchy that kept him buried becomes impossible to defend. The breaking point isn't just about one player or one team, it's about the entire NFL being forced to confront its racial bias in the most public way possible. What we've witnessed in Cleveland isn't an isolated incident, it's a microcosm of systematic racial bias that infects every level of the NFL. The statistical evidence is overwhelming. A black quarterback with a 74% college completion rate and 80% practice efficiency buried behind white quarterbacks who can't complete 50% of their passes. The institutional protection is undeniable, organizations scrambling to sign backup quarterbacks rather than admit their evaluation system is racially biased. The coded language is transparent, black excellence consistently minimized while white mediocrity is elevated and excused. Shedeur Sanders' rise to starter isn't a feel-good story about perseverance, it's a damning indictment of a league that still operates on racial hierarchies in 2024. When he takes the field Friday night against Carolina, he's not just playing football, he's exposing decades of systematic discrimination that the NFL hoped you'd never notice. The Browns thought they could bury this story at QB4, but they've actually created something far more powerful, undeniable proof that the NFL's meritocracy is a lie. Every completion, every touchdown, every moment of brilliance from Shedeur Sanders will be a reminder that talent has no color, but NFL evaluation systems clearly do. The question isn't whether Shedeur will succeed, the statistics already prove he's superior. The question is whether the NFL will finally confront its racial bias or continue protecting a system that prioritizes white comfort over black excellence. Either way, the truth is out, and there's no going back. This is bigger than football, and I need to hear from you. Have you noticed similar patterns of racial bias in how black and white quarterbacks are evaluated and covered? Drop your examples in the comments below. Let's build a database of evidence that the NFL can't ignore. And if you think I'm wrong, bring the statistics. Show me the white quarterbacks with 21% completion rates who got promoted instead of demoted. Show me the black quarterbacks with 80% efficiency who were kept on scout teams. The numbers don't lie, even when the organizations do. Share this video with anyone who still believes the NFL is a true meritocracy. It's time to have the uncomfortable conversations that lead to real change. Subscribe for more deep dives into the stories the league doesn't want you to see, and I'll see you in the next video, where we'll examine how this pattern plays out across the entire league.